the interesting thing about the founders when it comes to one of the topics on which you most focus, which is the role, what academic institutions are supposed to be, what universities are supposed to be, is that several of the key founders actually founded or were part of the founding of educational institutions. Benjamin Franklin in Pennsylvania, Thomas Jefferson at the University of Virginia. And when Thomas Jefferson founded the University of Virginia, he wrote a letter to William Roscoe. This was in 1820, and he said, this institution, meaning the University of Virginia, will be based on the illimitable freedom of the human mind. For here we are not afraid to follow truth wherever it may lead, nor to tolerate any error so long as reason is left free to combat it. Basically meaning, academia is the one place, and there's a lot of Enlightenment thinkers who said the same, where we have to be even more aggressive about ensuring that our debates are unlimited. You can question any orthodoxy, you can express any view that might offend people gravely, you can even be wrong about things where the solution is just to make sure that discourse is always free from government interference, from outside interference, or even from internal administrative interference, that the idea of an academic institution is full academic freedom and unlimited free discourse. Is that a view of academic institutions expressed there by Jefferson that you share?
No, that's actually not even Jefferson's view. And so he's talking in a kind of philosophical and speculative way about the illimitable freedom of the human mind. But if you actually read his Rockfish Gap Report, which is the charter document of the University of Virginia, part of his legacy of which he was most proud, he writes that the university should be, quote, at all times and in all things subject to the control of the legislature. And what he means by that is that this is a public institution, and the highest authority of that institution was the legislature, which chartered it, funded it, and guided it. This doesn't mean that the legislature should micromanage in every case or have too much of an influence if things are going well. But the point was, if the university were to get out of hand, if it were to lose balance, if it were to, compromise the pursuit of truth, Jefferson knew that in a republic, the people are the ultimate authorities. And he wanted to make clear at that very initial point that the legislature had control over reforming the institution. And when that institution had violated its core commitments, the legislature had unlimited authority to bring its power to bear to actually reorient, reform, and really restore the purpose of those institutions. And my argument this whole time is that this is exactly where we are now. And that because the universities have been so deeply corrupted, and this has been documented from the closing of the American mind, or even before that from William F. Buckley, God and Man at Yale, all the way to what I've tried to document in my book, that it's time now for the people to exercise their proper authority. And so Jefferson's own political sense was right, because he was balancing, on the one hand, the kind of spirit of inquiry of the mind, but he was bringing also to bear an administrative power and arrangement that would correct this excesses of what could be a kind of ideological capture or a failure of administration in universities. And I still think that that's important. To the extent that we can have universities function successfully autonomously, we should grant them that. But to the extent that they can't do so, the Constitution, and as well as the work of Jefferson in the early 19th century shows us the way. It's time to use that power that has really been abandoned and dormant for too long.
Well, I want to get to this private-public distinction that you're drawing, because a lot of the universities that we have that are most influential, that are now the primary targets of the Trump administration, are not actually public schools in the sense that they're a state school. They're run by the government. They do get funding for research projects that the U.S. government thinks is in the national interest in order to pursue, but they're not actually private. They're actually public schools. But let's leave that to the side for a moment. And even with regard to what you just said, that you're attributing to Jefferson's view, and it's too difficult to debate that or dispute that. But so I want to ask you, when you say that ultimately, in a republic, it's the people who have to decide how institutions function. Presumably, you mean public institutions or state universities. Would that mean that, for example, if a significant majority of the population were very passionately convinced about a particular view, so much so that they thought it should be prohibited essentially to even question or challenge it, that Jefferson's idea of an academic institution or yours is that once there's enough public support for a particular view, that it would be legitimate to basically ban the university from permitting or allowing any challenging or questioning of it?
Well, there's a couple different ways to tackle that question. I mean, obviously, the context now is the Constitution of the United States. And so that provides some guardrails and some limitations, of course, on the government. But let's break down that question, I think, in a way that makes it tangible, that makes it operational. If the people decide, that, let's say a university has a department of, phrenology or witchcraft, and then the people decide, hey, we don't want to actually spend our money supporting the witchcraft studies department at University of Texas, let's say hypothetically, legislators can pass a bill saying we zero out funding, we abolish the department. And in fact, we did precisely that at New College of Florida. We determined through all of the proper democratic channels and through an analysis of the evidence and some real kind of prudent thought that our gender studies department did not meet a scholarly threshold, was not providing enough value to students, and was not in line with the wishes of the voters and the citizens of the state. And so we abolished that department. That's obviously very clearly within the purview of political power and orienting, again, the university towards truth. But there's the secondary question. You have to look at speech and conduct. And so I don't advocate for restricting classroom speech. Some legislators in Texas, for example, have said, oh, we need to really, kind of tightly control the speech in the classroom on X, Y, and Z issues. I've made my opposition to that known. I continue to express opposition to that. There is a constitutional question, but even setting aside the constitutional question, I think it's unwise for a few reasons. One is that, again, it's micromanaging to the point of futility. Legislators cannot successfully do this. But second, you should be hiring faculty members whom you trust, whom you would like to give latitude, and whom you believe are grappling with these hard questions in the most productive way possible in the classroom, and you grant them as much autonomy as possible. And so if you're talking about pure speech, you and I may have a similar view. But when we're talking about administrative speech, for example, DEI programs that scapegoat, stereotype, demean, and discriminate for or against different groups based on their ancestry, the law, and I think just good judgment, is quite clear. At a state university, especially at private universities, slightly different story. But at a state university, as legislators have done in Florida and Texas and Tennessee and other states, they have every right to say, this is not an academic issue. It's not a free speech issue. We don't want to promote these ideologies as official conduct, as official policy, and as official decision-making of our state universities, of the government. And so I think that is a quite defensible road that we've been running down successfully, and abolishing these programs that don't serve the mission of the university, don't serve the interests of the people, and really don't even meet a basic threshold of responsible governance.
So just on the question of what you did at New College, if you, and I'm sure you've seen it, you talk to professors there, you talk to students there, what you were doing was very, very polarizing, very, very controversial. You became kind of the symbol of, obviously you had a lot of support, including from Governor DeSantis, who was elected, but you also had a lot of opposition. And one of the main critiques is that you are describing or characterizing your motives in this very kind of neutral, inherently virtuous manner. Like, we just want to improve the quality of education. We want to make sure it's meeting a certain scholarly threshold, that we want to make sure that these academic norms that are being permitted to govern how faculty operate align with public values. But they will say that what you basically did was you identified New College as problematic because there were a lot of faculty members, most faculty members, who were essentially left-wing, and that was reflected in their teaching and in their curriculum. And by the time you were done, it basically turned into the opposite, namely that it aligned with your political values as a conservative. Is that something that you do think in fact happened, that New College became less left-wing, the ideology that you reject, and more associated with the ideology that you personally or Governor DeSantis promotes, which is conservatism?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's how it always works. That's how it works everywhere. And in fact, that's how it's supposed to work. The conservative voters and taxpayers of Florida, you can read the Florida Constitution, and nowhere does it say that they must be forced to continue funding left-wing ideological programs within the universities, against their will, against their express wishes. And so, this is how it works. And I think that I'm totally happy with California universities being kind of more left-leaning and Florida universities being more right-leaning. That's completely fine. Universities do not have to be, and actually should not be, totally homogenous across the country. And at New College in particular, it was, by every metric that the state had put out, the lowest performing university. The university was functionally insolvent when we took over. It had failed to meet even basic student retention metrics for year after year after year. The legislature in the previous session was thinking about actually just dissolving the university entirely and transferring its assets elsewhere. And so this was really a rescue operation of a struggling college. And whereas so many universities are, hyper left-wing, especially in their conception of the humanities, actually providing a counterpoint or a counterbalance, I think, is really salutary for not only New College, but for the university system as a whole. And this doesn't mean that this is a kind of ideological imposition in toto. And in fact, we abolished the gender studies department because it was really a terrible performer. It was not oriented towards truth. Faculty members could not even tell you what a woman was. Basic kind of kindergarten level understanding of the world was just kind of impossible for these folks. But we still invited Judith Butler, who is the most famous gender theorist in the world. She's been a fierce critic of me personally. We invited her to speak, and she actually hosted an event at New College to provide a counterpoint and a contrary view. And so I don't actually buy the idea that there is a, kind of particular composition at a university that has to be required everywhere. But even if you say you want to have a wide range of discourse, what we've done at New College is not narrow the range of discourse. We've actually expanded it. We provided, I think, a much needed balance, and then we've implemented a classical liberal arts curriculum that gives an ethos to the place that really had been lacking for many years.
But the way you described what you did at New College in that interview that you did with the New York Times last month is you talked about, I think with a certain amount of pride, the fact that basically you purged the entire previous administration, the president and the deans and the administrators, and replaced them with people that you thought aligned more with the values and ideology of the residents of the state, which happens to be your ideology as well. And this is what I wanted, this to me is like the nub of the question, which is, so often people talk about, we need to return to the values of the founding, we need to preserve American values, and you can debate what the influences were on the founders, like Machiavelli, to what extent were they influenced by him, did they really like him or not, which parts did they like? But I think nobody doubts that the Enlightenment and the Enlightenment thinkers were a major influence on the American founders, just because that was the tradition out of which they were working. It originated in France and in the UK and in the Netherlands, so sort of Europe, where of course they all came from. And you read any Enlightenment thinker, and one of the core values that they emphasize most is the need for academic freedom, which they saw as kind of a cousin to free speech, that there was supposed to be these institutions free of control or limits where anything goes in terms of the discourse. And I'm wondering how that can be reconciled with what you just described your view being, which is that you have to have universities that are teaching things and expressing values that align with the majority of citizens of the state or the country. I mean, if you're kind of forcing universities to align with the ideology and politics of the 50% plus one of the residents, what does academic freedom then mean? Or maybe you don't believe in academic freedom, but if you do, what does it mean, and how can it be reconciled with that view?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have two problems with your position here. The first is a historical problem. You're not going to find the sentiment that you expressed about, academic freedom anywhere in any document related to universities and, say, the founding period in the United States. That concept was something that came much later, and which is why William F. Buckley in the 1950s said academic freedom is a superstition. And so
you don't
I think
Voltaire or Rousseau talked about that?
I don't think that Voltaire and Rousseau were a heavy influence on the American founding. I think you could go to John Locke and the Scottish in common sense Enlightenment figures. And again, these people would disagree. And just read the charter documents of the original universities in the United States. But I think there's another problem. The problem is that a university will have a set of values. Human institutions operate according to either an implicit or explicit set of values. It's how you make decisions. Do we open a gender studies department, or do we open an American history department? Do we open a DEI bureaucracy, or do we open a school for civic life? Because of the limitations of space, time, and money, you have to make decisions under pressure of which direction your university is going, what you support, what you don't support. And so, in essence, your position boils down to universities should be left to kind of a random selection, and whatever happens should be untouched. But my point is that the opposite is a much bigger problem. The problem is if you have universities that are monolithically aligned against the values of, let's say, 70% of the citizens, you have then citizens being compelled to fund the government that in turn, is waging a kind of ideological war against the citizens. And they have no redress. They have no mechanism for reforming their own government, which uses their own money. And so given the fact that every university will have a system of values, the question is not, who should do it or should we not do it? The question is, what will that system of values be? At New College of Florida, we said the classical liberal arts tradition, in pursuit of the true, the good, and the beautiful. We rewrote our mission statement to that effect. And University of California, Berkeley has nonstop DEI and social justice activism. That's their mission. And so, given that a system of values is inevitable, the only responsible question is, can we actually do the right thing philosophically, but also do the right thing democratically? And so I think honoring what I believe is the pursuit of truth, but also what has the consent of the governed, of the citizens of Florida or other states, really any state, I think is the right thing to do. It's the responsible way. And there's no getting around that problem. And certainly not by appealing to the Enlightenment. I mean, it's like academic freedom was essentially invented by the professor's lobby, and then kind of back projected as some great value that doesn't exist anywhere in the tradition of the, let's say, the late 18th or early 19th century.
I mean, I've spent a lot of time on the Enlightenment. It was a major focus of mine for a long time. And like I said, we can't resolve that now, but I'll certainly get a lot of very specific quotes from people like Voltaire and Rousseau and other Enlightenment thinkers about academic freedom. It was not invented in the 1950s or by a lobby, in my view. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.